Hi, welcome to this video about demand and the law of demand. So we'll be looking at the demand curve, factors that affect demand, and the law of demand itself. So we're going to start by looking at the price of a good and a service. So the price of a good or a service is determined by two different things. It is determined by a combination of supply, which is from a producer's point of view, as well as the demand, which is from the consumer's point of view. So when we look at these topics, we use different hats. We wear different hats. So supply, we think like the producer, and demand, we think like the consumer. And these two concepts together is how price of a product is determined. So what is demand? The definition of demand is the amount that a consumer is willing and able to purchase. So at different prices, as a consumer, our demand changes. So for example, if the price of a coffee was $20, our demand for that coffee would be different compared to if the coffee was only $3. And this is the concept of the law of demand. So the law of demand states that as the price of a good or service goes down, the quantity demanded of that good or service will increase because it is relatively more affordable for the consumer to purchase that good or service. And if you think about this in your own life, when things become cheaper, you see it as a deal, or you see more value in it, so you want more of it. And then the opposite is true. When the price of something goes up, people see it as expensive and can be less likely to buy it. So think about 3 different examples in your own life where you've seen this occur, and perhaps you haven't recognized it in regards to the law of demand. So the law of demand is broken into 2 separate areas. So on the left we have the yellow. So if the price of a good or service goes up, then the demand for that good or service will decrease. And then on the right we have the opposite. If the price of a good or service goes down, then the demand for it will go up. So if the price of a coffee went down to $1, more people are likely to purchase it. So the demand for that coffee will go up. We take this information and we put it on a chart called a demand schedule. So the demand schedule shows us the quantity demanded for a good at a particular price point. So as we can see here on the left, we've got the price for one iPad on the left column. So if the price of an iPad is $1,000, then we have the demand for that on the right column. So at $1,000, 5 people are going to demand it. As the price goes down to $800, we can see in the next row, then 10 people are willing and able to purchase it. When the price goes down to $600, then 15 people are willing and able to purchase it. And then lastly, $400, 20 people are able and willing to purchase it. So we can see that as the price has gone down, the demand for an iPad has increased. So this is called a demand schedule. We then take this demand schedule and we plot it into a graph. So where the red points are on this graph, those are the points from our demand schedule. So let's start at the top. So we have a title. So our graph must always have a title. The axes must always be labeled. So on the y-axis, you can see that we have the price of iPads and then the different prices along that y-axis. Our x-axis is labelled quantity demanded, and these are the number of iPads demanded by consumers. So those run along the bottom, along the x-axis. We then plot the points from the demand schedule onto this graph. So if we start in the first row, we have at $1,000, 5 people. So our first red dot is where the point crosses at $1,000 and 5 people. So you can see there that the yellow lines have been dotted in. And then the next one, $800 and 10 people. So our second red dot is placed there. $600 and 15 people. And our third red dot is pointed there. And $400 and 20 people. That's our last dot here on our demand curve. So once you've plotted your dots, you can connect them, and that's where we have that blue line. Just be sure that when you are creating your graph, that you don't overextend the lines past the dots. We call this extrapolating your data, and essentially it's incorrect because you've now extended that data out beyond the dot, which isn't true. So as we can see, this reflects the law of demand. As the price goes down, the quantity goes up. A demand curve will always look this way. It will always be downward sloping. So there are different things that affect the demand of a good or service other than price. So we saw before that price changes demand, but there are other things. So as we can see in this list that has been a bit distorted, we've got complementary goods. So there should be a C in front of that. So complementary goods, so things that go together. So we could say that if I was buying a coffee, I would also buy milk. So they go together. Tastes is the next one. If my tastes and preferences changed, perhaps I switched my diet and became vegan, so my demand for meat would change. So my taste and preference has changed. Income is that third one. If my income changes, I will either buy more. If I have more income, you could say that I would have more disposable income to spend. So my demand could increase, or if I lost a job, for example, then my demand would decrease because I would have less disposable income. Population, so if there was an increase in population or a decrease in population, so the amount of people, that would also affect demand. And the last one there is substitute goods. So a substitute is something that you would replace it for. So perhaps instead of buying coffee, I'm going to now buy green tea. So I've swapped it out for something else. So these factors are factors that change demand. And you'll need to remember these factors and apply them to the graph. So we're going to look at now, how does income change demand? So as I mentioned before, the higher the income is, this generally leads to an increase in demand because you have more money to spend. It's natural human behavior. And then vice versa, lower income causes a decrease in demand because most of your money will be going on essential needs rather than your wants. And how does our taste change as a consumer? It comes down to your personal preference. So, for example, if a good is popular or considered fashionable, then that demand for the good could increase. So something that, like a trend that happens in society, could push the demand up. And vice versa, if there is a disliked product in the market, then that would change demand as well. But it could also be personal. If you just all of a sudden didn't like carrots, then you wouldn't buy carrots anymore. So population, this means that more people are able to buy a good. So an increase in population, there's more people, the increase is going to show in their demand, and vice versa. Decrease of people would decrease the demand. And how does complementary goods change demand? So like we said, these are things that go together. So for example, if you like peanut butter, it is quite often put with jelly perhaps in the western side of the world. But if this was the case, if the demand for peanut butter decreases, then the demand for jelly would also decrease. And if the demand for peanut butter increased, then the demand for jelly would also increase. So complementary goods will have the same impact for demand because they go together. So if we look at milk and coffee, if the demand for coffee went up, then the demand for milk is going to go up because they go together. And then the opposite is true for a substitute good because it is replacing that particular good. So if people want to, they could substitute Sprite for 7-Up. Okay, so that would decrease demand. If people decided to buy Sprite, the demand for 7-Up would go down. So these 5 factors, which we can put into an acronym called C-TIPS, are factors that change demand and will actually cause the demand curve to shift, either to the right if it is an increase, or to the left if it is a decrease. So a right shift occurs when one of those factors increases demand, and a left shift occurs when one of these factors decreases demand. So let's look at an example of this. So if the increase, so as we can see, an increase in demand, that's what it would look like. The blue line is now shifting to the right. We've increased our demand. And the way that we can see that is if we take the first red dot, for example, so we started at $1,000 and 5 people demanded it. If there was an increase in demand, the price hasn't changed, so some other factor has caused demand to increase. That green line now shows us that still at $1,000, but now the demand is at 15 because another factor other than price has caused a shift in demand. And then vice versa, if we look at, for example, the original $800 and 10 people, we've shifted the curve to the left. So still at $800, the demand is 0 if we look at that graph. So a decrease in demand will shift the curve to the left, and an increase in demand would shift the curve to the right. Okay, so that's a little summary about the increases and decreases of demand, as well as factors that change demand. So I hope that was helpful for you, and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.